Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and in this one, we're going to be talking a little bit about the Infinity Gauntlet from Marvel Comics and the Source from DC Comics. We're going to talk about our main GMPC, who we've kind of been following his story throughout the history of this channel. We're going to talk about a big transformation that he goes through in this game, why that happens, and what it is exactly that happens to him, what is inflicted upon him. So, before we get into that, make sure you smash that like button. Check to see if you're still subscribed because YouTube loves to unsubscribe you without telling you. And leave us a comment. That helps us out on our end with the YouTube algorithm, but more importantly, we love hearing from you guys. We have an awesome community here, and that's thanks to you. So thank you so much for being here. So, all that said, let's get into it. The prologue to this one is basically a recap of a very quick nutshell kind of version of what came before. And that is that we've got John Redbridge. He had been corrupted by the Lochnar or influenced by it at the very least. He'd been doing a bunch of stuff he should not have been doing. And he ends up with this massive harem of girls. And of course, he can only be in one place at a time. So he can be with one of them, and then that means he's neglecting all the others, and so on and so forth. And eventually, the Scarlet Witch, who was in the harem, gets rid of the Lochnar, kind of fixes a lot of what had become wrong with our game world. And so he becomes a better person, right? His motivation changes from what was probably, honestly, he had kind of two sides to his personality that he was struggling between these two sides. The one was probably like power lust, and the other one was probably more of like a responsibility of power. So coming out the other end of that story, he's he's trying to be more responsibility of power these days, right? So he looks at this mess that he made, this thing where he kind of painted himself into a corner, and like with this harem, he's got kids with some of them, and you know what I mean? And so he's trying to figure out what is the right thing to do. And so what he ends up doing is he uses the split power. And I mentioned this last time, but I know a lot of people didn't watch the last video. So in DC Heroes, which is what we're using, they have this thing called the Source. And it is supposed to be where all superpowers come from, right? And so in our game, we have these things called a source key. And each dimension in the multiverse has its source key for that world. And so when he got it, which is kind of like for us, it's like the DC version of the Infinity Gauntlet. And he had the Infinity Gauntlet too, but it would, therefore derive its powers from the source like everything else does. So either way you look at it, it's the same stats. But the point is the stats they give it in DC is there are 9 attributes in DC Heroes: dexterity, strength, body, intelligence, willpower, mind, influence, aura, spirit, right? And so all 9 of those attributes would be at 75 APs. And then he only has 3 powers then. He has 100 APs of recall, which is like a photographic memory, basically. He's got 75 APs of precognition, which is the ability to see the future. And then he has 50 APs of omnipower, which you can substitute for any other power in the book. So he takes that 50 APs of omnipower, and what he substitutes it for is split. And so after he does that, you just take the numbers that I just mentioned and you subtract 50 from each of those numbers. And then that means he now has 50 duplicates of himself that he's created. And this is, by the way, this is something I've seen people get hung up on. That does not mean that the total number would be 50, because a character like, say, Batman, who doesn't have any APs of the split power, right? Batman still exists. So, it would be that zero APs of split plus one guy, right? So, therefore, with the John Redbridges, we would be talking about 51 characters, not 50 characters. At any rate, if that's confusing for anybody, let me know in the comments section. I'll do my best to try to explain it better. So, okay, so we put him in Central Park, and they're kind of having sort of a little meeting amongst themselves, trying to get a handle on this. And one of the things that we do is we say the more time they spend separate, you know, they are going to start to become different characters, right? They're going to diverge, and they're going to be different people and not just all the same guy. They're going to be more like brothers or something, right? So at any rate, they're in Central Park, kind of in a little crowd, talking about where to go from here, what they should do, da 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 da. And they hear a woman scream. So they go running over there because now they don't have a lot of powers, right? They would now have 50 APs of recall, but because John Redbridge is so old, we basically said that power is kind of worthless. That's just his ability to remember everything that happened to him in his long life. And then the other power he would now have is 25 APs of precognition, which is only 4 hours. But at any rate, so he runs over to this area because he can't fly anymore or whatever. And there's a woman being chased by a man. And the woman, her skin and her hair and everything is completely gray, right? It's just gray. And it would be a perfectly, like, if you used any kind of like art programs where maybe you've got like a slider tool, where maybe one extreme is black and the other extreme is white, right? The shade of gray I'm talking about would be right there at the exactly 50% mark, right? And then she has yellow eyes, like glowing yellow eyes. And then the guy who's chasing her he's the guy pictured here in this video, where he's split down the middle, and one half of him is black with a glowing red eye, and the other half is white with a glowing blue eye. And so the John Redbridges show up, and they want to help the girl, right? And so something interesting happens, which is when you touch either of them, these characters have the split power, but it's usable on others, right? And so if you touch the guy who's black and white, it creates like it splits that your character in half. But here's the thing. One of them is now, to use Dungeons and Dragons terminology, one of them is now lawful good. The other one is now chaotic evil, right? And so as you're trying to sort of save the girl, this is part of the problem with this adventure, is you've got your hands full with this new evil twin of yours. Does that make sense? Um, so, and that's just, when one of these guys does it. And then when one of them grabs the girl to try to help her somehow get her out of harm's way, they also split. But the gray girl does not have she does not change your alignment. She just turns you into two people, right? Um, so the effect that she has on you is only physical. So at any rate, we go through, and the reason for that was we ran a couple of adventures. I liked that but let me back up a little bit. So we'd been running John Redbridge for years and years and years and years at this point, right? And his character sheet had gotten really, really unwieldy. One of the reasons we kind of upgraded him to this, kind of to God mode was for the practical thing of having a less unwieldy character sheet. Because, like I said, it didn't take me long to tell you what his whole sheet looked like, right? Oh, I left out the part where his skills are all linked, but that's fairly minor in the grand scheme of things. But the point is, so it was a much smaller character sheet. Like you could put it on an index card, which I really like to do if I can. Um, and I had a wife and kids now in real life. I wanted to spend time with them instead of spending all week long planning for a game like I used to do when I was single. And so streamlining the game was really important to me. So we had done that, and in a way it kind of worked, but then he was this completely unusable, gigantic thing, right? We couldn't really go on adventures. Just having a dexterity of 25 alone means nobody could ever hit him, right? Even when we tried to run him with something like the third edition version of the Superman stats that are in the game, there are Justice League characters and villains and stuff, but none of them have a dexterity of 25. So it wasn't working as well as we wanted. That's why we made this character called Mr. Splits. That's the black and white guy. So, um, so at any rate, the new stats then, instead of being Dex 25, Strength 25, Body 25, all that jazz, we cut those numbers in half. So of course, half of 25 would normally be 12.5. In most role-playing games that I play, anyways, you round down, so that becomes a 12. And as it just so happens, if you look at the Marvel system, because I'm going to focus on that for just a second, a Dex of 12 in Marvel would be characters kind of like in the ballpark of Spider-Man or Nightcrawler, where they're still very agile, but it's much more manageable now, right? And there are way more characters who can hit a Dex of 12. So we liked that. Um, a strength of 12 and a body of 12 would be about where Thor is at, or the Hulk on the first round of combat, because the thing they famously say with the Hulk is the angrier he gets, the stronger he gets. So forget about that boost in stats that he eventually has just on round one when he hasn't been more aggravated yet, right? That is how strong the new Redbridge characters were. And we're like, well, that's pretty decent. And if you look at DC, there's tons of characters that are stronger than that. So it gave us a Redbridge. Well, let me back up. So that was the Dex 12, Strength 12, Body 12. We covered that. Intelligence 12 is like Batman. Willpower 12 is good. It's nothing fantastic, but it's all right. Mind 12 is pretty good. That's about where you want it to be in terms of resisting whether it's a psychic attack or whatever. Influence 12 is crazy good, actually. That's a very charismatic character. Same with Aura. It's actually kind of hard, I think, to differentiate between influence and aura because they overlap so much. And then finally, Spirit 12 is, I believe, fearlessness. It's just good stuff for a hero to have. And then he has still, the recall power, but like I said, it's worthless. At this point, he can't even remember his entire life. Now he's got memory gaps because he is so much older than he has recall, right? Um, so we played him as slightly forgetful. And then the precognition also gets cut way down. So he doesn't have much foresight now. like he did before, but we kind of liked that because we didn't want him just sort of creating a save point willy-nilly where when something bad happened, he could just rewind to that moment of time and, have endless mulligans. And again, no, the Omni power's been used up splitting, so forget all about that. And then all of his skills were at level 12, which is good, but it makes him kind of like a Batman level character or something at that point. I mean, the general ballpark of Batman, not exactly Batman, but you get the gist. He's suddenly way, way, way more manageable than the cosmic being he had been. So that really opened up a new era in the game, and we really liked it. We thought it worked really, really well. Um, he had earned a bunch of hero points over the years. He earned the right to be the big tough guy that he was. Um, but he couldn't really go adventuring. So in the way that mattered the most, the character had kind of lost touch with his roots. And so this was a big return to form. This is kind of bringing him back there to where he sort of started actually missing a lot of that stuff because now he can't fly, he can't shoot an energy blast. A lot of the stuff that had always been a big part of the character, he is now having to struggle just to get by. Just like the inability to fly, for instance, was really super frustrating for him. And so we played around with stuff like him using a jetpack or carrying a laser pistol and like kind of trying to compensate. But at any rate, I want to try to make this video shorter than a lot of the videos I've been doing. So the way that, well, first of all, the good ones fight, because like I said, we got now, there's over 100 of them now in Central Park, right? And so let's break it down into groups of 25. We'll kind of do it that way. 25 of them are as evil as it gets. These guys are just a problem, right? 25 of them are about as good as it gets, right? Where they are just the most wholesome, pure, wonderful guys ever. Like they could absolutely pull Excalibur from the stone or lift Mjolnir or whatever, right? And then the rest of them are where he was when he started, where he, like I said, he was kind of responsibility of power. He was trying to be a good man, but he's a flawed character. So you've got more than 50 that fall into that category. But still, that means basically three-fourths of the characters here are heroes now, and only a fourth of them are villains. So the heroes win. And the way they finally deal with Mr. Splits is they actually start ripping trees out of the ground and they throw him at Mr. Splits. And by the way, in terms of his stats, he's basically like a Daredevil or a Batman or a Nightwing. He's kind of in that general ballpark, like physically. His big thing is if you touch him, you split, right? Um, but that's it. Like he can't fly, he can't teleport, none of that. And his stuff does not work on anything that's not a character. He can't, for instance, touch a $1 bill and turn it into two $1 bills. So yeah, they throw trees and they make kind of like a square around him. Like they just fence him in. And then they wait for other characters to show up who have like Green Lanterns, for instance, because then the Green Lanterns are able to touch him with force manipulation. I want to say Doctor Strange showed up, but I don't hold me to that. I can't remember if Doctor Strange was one of them or not. But I do know that there were heroes here on the scene who did not have to physically touch him. And that was how you would deal with it. And then another thing was he seemed to be mute, both him and the girl. And to this day, we've never really said what their deal is. They show up every once in a while because um, they're hard to contain, you know? So they have been reoccurring characters. We've used them before on characters where we either wanted to take a kind of overpowered character and make them easier to deal with in terms of rules, and stats, or we wanted to create an evil twin for somebody because we thought that story would be interesting. So because of that, he has shown up a lot. We seem to imply that these guys are part of some kind of a race, like aliens or something like that, but we've never really said it. And, just I'm going to put all my cards on the table as the guy who made him and the GM and everything. Like, I've never decided what his deal is because I was looking at it as uh the effect I wanted in the game. I was thinking about more like rules and stuff like that. And so I also made it where you can't read his mind. When people try to read his mind, what they basically get is something along the lines of like an alien language, and it gives them a headache. Because I kind of like giving certain characters a sense of mystery. So yeah, that's Mr. Splits. Mr. Splits has shown up quite a few times over the years. And more importantly, that's what's going on with the Redbridge characters now, is now they're, Dex 12, Strength 12, Body 12. They're now they're adventuring level again. And they're struggling to figure out how their stuff works. Oh, and I left a part out, which is of course we lock up the bad guys. Like I said, 25 of them were bad. We lock those guys up. Um, and then we're talking about going to go find Dagger and see if she can use her powers to fix them. But that starts to drift into X-Men territory, and let's put a pin in that. Let's call this it for this video. Um, As always, thank you so much for listening. I know there's a million other things you could be doing with your time, and you're listening to me instead. And I appreciate you guys. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much. Be sure to support the channel by smashing that like button. Check to see if you're subscribed because YouTube loves to unsubscribe you without telling you. And leave us a comment. I love hearing from you guys. We've got an awesome community, and it helps us out with the algorithm. So that's it for me. From everybody here at the longest running superhero role playing game on earth, we hope you guys have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure. Bye.